Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Business Roundtable podcast. I've got two returning guests this time around. We're excited to have you and jump into our topic today. For those of you listening for the first time, my name is David Carr of Steward Your Business, where I help business owners and their teams know themselves better to lead themselves. And that's going to be one of our topics tonight in the tool that we're going to use. Bill, we're super excited to have you back this week. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience.
I am Bill Hatch. I am a leadership guide and podcaster under the banner of Bald Spots Productions. And
so glad to have you here, Bill.
Christian ideals and have a lot of fun business stuff going on and all that. And I have a new internet connection.
Yay! So this isn't just a teaser. You're connected. So look up Bill. Look up Bald Spot Production, Bill Hatch. Look for all those great podcasts. We're glad to have you back here, Bill. And Charlie, we've missed you for a few weeks. We're glad to have you back on the podcast and sharing with everybody. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be back. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, perfect. All right. So Charlie Chen, I'm the CXO over at CyberX, where our focus and commitment is to deliver peace of mind while delivering world-class client experiences. And so you don't have to put up with rude IT people.
And that can be a pain sometimes.
Yeah.
But very much necessary. And we're grateful to have you here, Charlie, and have your perspective. So I know you both are in leadership positions, and we've talked about knowing yourself in a previous podcast. I think probably one of our earlier episodes in the series. If you guys missed it, please go back and check it out. But I thought tonight would be fun to pick out a tool of the toolbox that I use as a guide with Giant. And one of the tools we have in there is one that's called Know Yourself to Lead Yourself. And this is a specific tool, and I'll throw it up here. For those of you that are watching, I'll throw it up here. But if you haven't watched it or you're listening to this podcast, there's a book that's called The 100X Leader, by Jeremy Kubicek and Steve Cochran, also founders of Giant. You can also look up that book or just reach out to me directly. It's in the book there that talks about this tool, and we have a lot of different tools. So I'm excited to get into this with you guys tonight and introduce this. But I mean, I think, like I said, we've talked about this in previous episodes, and so a bit, and I wanted to dig deeper into one aspect of knowing ourselves well, and it's what I call starting with our tendencies. And just to set a framework, in my mind, and the way I look into the book, is tendencies are things that we all have, and they're kind of natural. They're just something that we will always have, if you will. It's not something that can go away, but we can affect how it is. It's like, but recognizing that we all have tendencies, I think, is an important understanding. And it's not bad or good. They just are. And then you figure out how those tendencies show up. Sometimes they can be beneficial. Sometimes they can not be beneficial. So you have to look at them. So I wanted to just throw out the idea with both Charlie and Bill, and I'll start with you, Bill, first, but just the idea of the word tendencies, what comes to mind when you hear that, Bill, and just starting with a framework of knowing ourselves and knowing our tendencies. So, Bill, just thoughts there?
Wow. Well, of course, tendency is something that you tend to do. But I know for myself, I have a tendency to say and a lot, which is a really great quality for a podcaster.
Yeah, right. How about you, Charlie? What about you? When you hear tendencies, tendency, what's the thing that comes to mind?
Yeah, so I'm glad. That's a great topic, by the way, that you picked, David. Thank you for bringing this to
Absolutely.
light. And, yeah, so when I hear a tendency, what I think of is story, and whether we know about it or not, all of our lives, all of us human beings we're run by this autopilot story that's really running the show. And when I say story, it's basically what we believe about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And what we made certain things that happened early on in our formative years mean about us, people, and life in general, and that which you don't know and you don't know that you don't know is what's could be most detrimental to you. Obviously, we all develop strong suits or coping mechanisms to survive those trauma experiences, but nevertheless, we're never free, because that story is what's running the show, and we think we have free will, but there's a set habitual pattern, which is the strongest force within human beings. Tony Robbins says the most powerful thing within humans is to be congruent with who they believe that they are. And so if you believe that story of who you already are, that set definition of what you're good at, what you're not good at, or even things that you're not even aware that's running the show. Like for me, it was like, I'm a failure. And no matter how hard I try or what I do, I'm always going to be a failure. And I didn't even realize that was running the show. No wonder like things never like always fell apart, even though things were going great. So that's that which is that tendency that you don't get clear on and get awareness on will keep you in that box that you've predefined for yourself. And so you're really not exploring, growing, and living. You're just playing out what's already predetermined with or without your input.
Yeah, that's a great, we can be kind of asleep to them, like you're saying, Charlie, and letting these stories run, or we can start to awaken ourselves and be aware of these things, and then we can actually start to do something about them. And that's kind of a really great lead in. I'm going to share my screen here. So those of you that are listening in, if you're missing this, you can go back and find us on YouTube. Actually, we have a full video there. We often and also do a presentation on LinkedIn as well. So those of you who are seeing us on LinkedIn, we want to make sure that you can go listen to us, find us on any podcast. But I want to show you guys a screen here. I'm going to share with this tool, and let's see here. I'll pull it up so you guys should see this. So this is the tool, one of the tools that we use in the giant toolbox as a guide that I'm trained on is this idea. And you'll see it's like an infinity loop, if you will. So how do we know ourselves? Like you're talking about, Charlie, who we really are, what's the story leading it? And then how do we lead ourselves through that? And I started this episode talking about tendencies because that's a great place to start. Is if you look at this infinity loop, you can go and look in your tendencies and behaviors and your patterns, and those lead to actions, right? And that will come around to consequences or results or fruit, whatever you want to call it. There's something that comes out of the actions that then forms our reality. Like you're talking about, Charlie, like what we believe to be true, what we understand, how everything is. And so I think this is a simple tool. When you look at it, there's a lot to it. And I wanted to start our conversation tonight, and I'll lead with an example here where of this tool. And so I'm going to slip one more slide here for you guys, giving you an example. And I'm going to, let's see here. I'm just going to show the screen fully, guys, for a minute here. There we go. So tendencies here's an example. So if you're a perfectionist, perhaps your desire is not to share something until it's perfect, right? That's a tendency. I'm going to hold back. I want to make sure it's perfect because it might undermine my confidence in me or my competence. It's under. And so if you think of this as a tendency, a perfectionist tendency, and you may have this one, you're holding back. What happens is there's a pattern that comes up, and the pattern is perhaps withholding ideas. It's withholding drafts. You don't want to share. It's not perfect. So I'm just waiting to get it perfect. So there's this pattern. There's a tendency, and then there's a pattern. And then what happens in the action? You communicate less because you don't want to invite collaboration. And now, until late in the project or process, right? Well, what happens if we're doing that? That might cause people to worry or doubt. about your confidence or work ethic, or you start doing redundant work, it gets too late to get input. So there's consequences, right? And then the reality comes, now colleagues doubt their skill or commitment, which fuels their fears, frustrations, bitterness, and creates a negative reputation. So this is an example, and I'll come back to you, Charlie, first, and I'd like you, Bill, as well. But to first focus on this first part of identifying tendencies and patterns that you know about yourself, and we can certainly walk through the whole process here. But I'll bring it back so we can all see you guys. There we go, and I'm going to move it back one more. So then, Charlie, when you look at this, how many tendencies do you think you have? We'll start there.
Countless. There's so many things that I still don't know that I don't know about myself. That I continue to uncover as I go about life and work. And so it's a fun journey. That's part of the growth process, is uncovering those blind spots. And I like the graph. It's almost like that. If it's a disempowering story, then it's a vicious cycle, right? And a negative feedback loop. And so just first step is always awareness. Once you can identify, like what you showed there, identifying what leads to that tendency, why you do it, and what's the consequence of that, the cause and effect of it, then you can actually tackle it and make a conscious choice about, okay, how do I want to address this tendency and this root at the root level?
Yeah. How about you, Bill? Do you have a few tendencies?
Yeah, I do have a few tendencies. Actually, I can relate pretty well to the example tendency. I don't know that I'd call myself a perfectionist, but I do tend to put things off until I've got them just right.
So it would be fun. I thought we'll just take a couple of minutes. Might be fun just to go back and forth as you guys think about this. I'll give you a tendency of mine. So I have a tendency to repeat stories sometimes, and because I can't remember who I told the story to be honest. And when I was working with a lot of different people, I would do that, and I would repeat myself. So what I had to do as a tendency of this, recognizing this pattern, is part of the action was, and if I told the people, some people would be polite and they wouldn't say anything, which I felt like, okay, that's kind of a waste of time. They already heard the story. They don't even hear it again. So one of the things I had to do as a consequence and an action that I took was leading myself well, was I would actually, before I even would talk to some people, I would actually empower them. I would say, look, if you heard me tell you this story, please don't be polite. You can stop and put your hand up and tell me. That's okay. That was like leading myself, right? Because I didn't want to like keep this tendency and pattern where it was like that wasn't helpful. People were very polite and kind. That was nice, but I was like, okay, no, we don't need that. So, understanding that. Another one I'll just throw out another tendency is I like to talk aloud, and this was one from my wife. Is totally different. My tendency is to talk aloud and think aloud. My wife is completely not that way. So what I have to realize is if I'm going to talk aloud or think aloud, I almost have to tell her and preface that saying, I'm thinking aloud. I'm talking out. Don't take this fully. It's not that fully baked yet, right? Because in her mind, if she's hearing it, you're done. You've completed the thought process. You're now telling me, and it's frustrating to somebody on the other end when they're like, what's going on here? So I wanted to give you guys a couple tendencies, and again, it's knowing this, and so I can preface it. I can take actions that lead to positive consequences and create a more beneficial outcome environment. But if I didn't know that and I keep doing it, it's can be obviously frustrating. And what we're all about here on this podcast, the Business Roundtable podcast, is helping you as a business owner or a leader effectively lead your team, knowing yourself, working well, trying to implement all these different components of a business, right? And so, Charlie, I'll come back to you. Just, other like a specific tendency that you have that you know
Yeah,
about?
I think one that is most impactful that perhaps will add some value to people out there is
Yeah.
The tendency to not have boundaries, and but like putting myself as a doormat, almost like feeling responsible for how somebody else feels and somebody else's emotions, and obviously that's very disempowering. And so that was before even understanding the concept of boundaries, that each person is responsible for their own well-being and their own emotions and their own thoughts. And of course we all contribute to each other's emotions, but if we've done our part and somebody else still decides to be upset or rude or whatever it is, and we still think that we're responsible for that, then that's robbing ourselves of our own boundary, of our own peace of mind, of our own happiness. And it was quite paradoxical, because boundaries set me free, which in the past I was like, what are you talking about, boundaries? I'm limitless, right? Like, so like it was super awesome and such a liberating experience to discover boundaries and know that I don't need to be more than human, because I'm not less than human, which oftentimes stems from the toxic shame that we get passed down through generations, that somehow we're defective and broken as a human being, and that we become human doings. We're defined and justified by what we do, and not just by who we are. That somehow we're flawed and defective as a person. So when we can go away from that tendency that somehow we have to keep proving ourselves, then it will liberate you. So
Yeah, that's a great point. So Charlie, you're kind of living this out. So you're recognizing here that, hey, I'm kind of being a doormat, kind of things taking over, and you created some boundaries. You took some actions that led to a positive consequence, meaning I'm taking care of myself. I'm being healthy, right? You're still caring for people. So then you're leading yourself in that, and then you're setting a healthier reality of like, this is who I am. This is who Charlie Chen really is. He has healthy boundaries. He's creating this space. Even though you're going to have this tendency, right, Charlie? You're always going to have this tendency to be a people pleaser, right? It's just innate in you. It's not going to go away, right? Because you meet people, your children, your wife, right? They're going to pick on that.
And it doesn't mean that you go get combative and say like, oh, you crossed my boundaries. That's really going to piss people off who don't respect boundaries. So you can still apologize for, upsetting them or whatever the case, but then internally you don't allow yourself to be sucked into that drama and that emotional roller coaster, because your self-worth is no longer tied to how they feel. You see what I mean? You can,
absolutely.
Now, and it also allows you to be empathetic. Like, okay, what type of unresolved or toxic shame that they're coming from and operating from, that they're not even aware of, and you just can't imagine what they may have gone through in their life to wind up the way they are. And so, having the understanding and awareness of tendencies allows us to be more empathetic and compassionate as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Charlie. How about you, Bill? Do you have an example of where you've had a tendency and then how you were able to, number one, recognize the tendency, and number two, recognize the tendency or pattern? I guess what would that be? I guess the first part I want to know, Bill, is because I think this is really important for everybody to understand. How do you pick that out? How did you, like Charlie, recognize he was struggling with this, and then he's like, okay, I gotta create a boundary, because he found a tool, a resource to get him in the boundary. But how, Bill, have you identified your tendencies or patterns?
Well, because there were big consequences. I have a tendency to think in my head that there's plenty of time to do stuff. oh, that project's not due until next week. I can add in these 3 other things in the same period of time. And so the pattern is I do that, somebody comes along and says, "Hey, Bill, we're going to do this." Great, let's do that. And so I would take actions of adding the action of just adding more stuff into my schedule. And I like what Charlie said about humans doing instead of humans being. I heard that earlier in the year and started working on that. But the consequence of adding all this extra stuff in was that I couldn't get anything done. I'd get vapor lock, I guess you could say, to throw back to my days as an auto mechanic. I couldn't figure out what to start on. Everything was about to be due all at the same time. And so things would fall to the wayside. And the reality was that people were thinking of me as unreliable because they didn't know that I had tacked on all these other things, because I had this delusion that the clock was my friend. So I've had to change my way of looking at things, to fight that urge in my brain to consider that there's plenty of time, and push myself to turn things in early. Instead of letting them sit and stew, even though sometimes there are good reasons to let something sit. Like when you're writing a paper, a proposal, or something like that, and it's like, okay, I finished it, I'm gonna set it aside, and then I'm gonna look at it again tomorrow, and all. But you have to do even that early, or I have to even do that early, and because otherwise I'm not doing anything, not getting anything done.
Well, and I want you said something earlier that triggered me, in this model here, this tool, Bill, is that I'm starting with tendencies, but the reality is you could actually go to start from reality. So the reality was, like you were saying, Bill, I am not having enough time to get things done. That's my current reality. And you could work your way backwards too. So like you said, the reality is I don't have enough time. So why is that? Well, I kept, I had a lot of people say they needed all these things, right? So I kept adding things here, and that's because my tendency was to just say yes instead of considering them, right? So it's just like adding, and the consequences are I have a bunch of things that are backed up now, and then my reality is I can't get them all done. So if that helps people too, is to look at your reality, and it's like reverse engineer it, if you will. And there's nothing wrong with that too. So look at the reality of where you're at and figure out, like, okay, what are the consequences that led to that reality, and what were the actions surrounding that? And then look at your tendencies or patterns that kind of created that experience. So I'll just use me as another example. Boy, there's some different ones. There's a lot I could pull from, but let's just say I had this tendency of a very positive outlook. I'm a very positive person, encouraging. Another tendency here, and similar along the lines of you, Bill, where I always look at the best in people, which is not a bad thing. That's I think generally a good thing. However, when I don't consider the person that I'm looking at, and what would happen to me at times is I would, as a manager or supervisor, so if you're a business owner or a leader and have a team, this is something you may have to be aware of. I would overestimate the capability of team members. So my tendency would be, I think really great of them. They're amazing. I know they can get lots of work done. I'm super excited. I'm energized. That was my tendency and pattern. I would then assign work to them, right? And they wouldn't want to say no, because like, the boss is giving me this. I want to do good. I want to do the positive. Well, what happened is they would feel guilty and they wouldn't be able to finish all the assignments. They get overwhelmed, and then we would have missed deadlines, or something would be off, or the work would be off, or it would, and so the reality was I was the one instigating it, and it perpetuates like a domino effect onto other people. So it's like, again, leading yourself to know yourself, but the same thing applies to teams as well. You cannot lead a team if you don't know yourself well, understanding this. So I want to come back to you, Charlie, in a minute, of like, you talked about a personal experience with your boundaries for you, and working with others. How have you seen a tendency affect maybe in business, or, you speak to one of those as a business owner or a leader? Where's a tendency that you've recognized, that you've had to adjust or taken a different action on?
Yeah, it actually piggybacks off of what Bill was saying in terms of overloading my plate,
Mm-hmm.
and then also having this Superman complex of thinking like, if you got to do it right, you got to do it yourself. And so almost like the opposite of what you talked about, David, of
Yep.
you overestimating what your team could do. I overestimate often what I can do and underestimate what the power of the team could do, and just make it impossible to deliver. And so it never works, right? To overpromise and underdeliver. You want to set yourself up for success by underpromising, asking for more time than you think you need, and then overdeliver, coming in early. In terms of finishing the deliverable early, as opposed to just barely making the time or even missing the deadlines. So those are certainly big tendencies. That's a big tendency that I'm constantly having to be conscious of, so I don't fall back into that trap.
Yeah, that's important. What you're saying, Charlie, it's just the reverse of what I said. Like you said, if you underestimate your team's capability, they're not being fully engaged, right? They're not using all their abilities, and you're like, oh, I'm the only person that can solve it. Yeah, many of us follow this. I did it too. I'm the only person that knows how to do this. I can do it quicker. Okay, well, that's your tendency to do that. But again, does it get you the reality that you really want? Like, no, I'm all stressed out. It isn't really what I want. And how do I figure out how to break that and be aware of that? So capturing that tendency. How about you, Bill? What have you seen in working with teams or organizations where tendency has come up?
Well, I have seen quite a bit of that. When you take too much onto yourself, you are actually diminishing your team. You don't give people the ability to improve themselves, to work on their weaknesses or work on their strengths, because strengths can always be stronger. Or even if they can't do something particularly well, maybe they can do it good enough, but it gives them the boost up, like a boost up to feel better about themselves, to get some confidence that they need to be able to work better and actually improve. Hey, Bill trusted me to do this job. Wow, that's awesome. So I'm going to do that and all. But when you take it all on yourself, you're diminishing that possibility for the members of your team. It's like, oh, don't do that. I'll do that. I can do that better. I can do it faster. And your team members all of a sudden lose their confidence. They think you think poorly of them, and things just kind of go downhill from there. It's a horrible vicious cycle, because you'll lose good people, you'll turn good people to bad people, and and then once again we'll be back to the tendency of putting too much on our plates.
Right.
And deliverables don't get delivered.
Yeah. So, going through this tool tonight, I just wanted to, bring this around and to get you practicing, all of us. Like you said, Charlie, you said you've got too many tendencies to even count. But the good thing is we all have an opportunity every day to take account for them and to adjust. Again, I want to make sure everybody hears this loud and clear. Your tendencies are always going to be there. They're not going to go away. It's a matter about the actions that you take around them. I don't think, like you said, Charlie, you're always going to probably want to be that person that's just going to take it on, be Superman, or like you said, Bill, I can figure out how to do more. I just naturally, and these aren't necessarily like I said, bad or good. They just have to recognize like there's part of that that's good, Bill, because you're actually being open to like, I'm willing to take on some projects or new things. Other people may have a tendency to just say no to everything, and they're missing out on opportunities that they would otherwise have a great experience. So it's just a matter of how do you manage that in a healthy way, right? And I get the question I would bring up as we're getting close to wrapping this up tonight, just is you know yourself, and I think in building relationships with others, if you build a relationship with others, like I was telling you guys earlier, I would express to somebody, hey, you've heard me share the story, stop me. But if to have others speak into our lives of tendencies that they see in us that we may not see or we may not recognize. And so as we kind of think about this, how we can apply this is speaking to others and say, do you see a tendency or a pattern of behavior in me that is not creating a positive, consequence in reality? Are you inviting people to speak into your life that can speak to those? And I'll just start with you, Charlie. Have you been able to have others speak to you or recognize that and share that with you?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, just have you. So you recognize your tendencies, which is a part of knowing ourselves to lead ourselves. But I feel like as we build relationships and connections with one another, it's not usually from a stranger. You're not going to take it, but I think from people that we know, like, trust, love, inviting them to speak into our lives and to speak into patterns of behavior or tendencies that don't serve us, or again undermine our credibility or our effectiveness.
Right.
Just Charlie, just your perspective on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. The openness and willingness to learn and staying humble, that's the base, the foundation for leading a great life and just success in general. Nobody likes to deal with people that don't take ownership and responsibility for how they show up in life. And we may be blind to our tendencies, but if somebody points it, if you make it known and that you welcome feedback, then, and here's a phrase, a quote that I heard recently that was super profound. It says, if you're not the problem, there is no solution. When you can operate from that level of ownership, you become super attractive. People want to work with you because they know that you're always going to take ownership and responsibility for what you bring to the table.
Yes. Great perspective, Charlie. Thanks for sharing that. How about you, Bill? Just, your experience in being able and having other people able to speak into your life of a tendency or a pattern of behavior.
When I was younger, it was definitely tougher to take those kinds of criticisms. Although really it's not a criticism, really, because it is helping you find a real problem. I mean, it's something that people pay a lot of money to psychologists to help them dig out. And when your all too honest friend can point it out to you for free. But yeah, learning to be humble and be receptive to those kinds of points is key to growth. It's often said that I've often heard it said that. Oh wow! I lost my train of thought. That
you're having us hang here.
I'm having you hang here. Oh goodness gracious! But yeah, that being open. Being open to the criticism, having it pointed out to your flaws, is like being an empty cup, and that empty cup can only be filled with more. If you're so full of yourself that that cup is full, then anybody trying to put anything more into it, it's just going to spill on the floor and be wasted. And you never know when somebody's going to bring up a better idea than what you have. So, and that will accomplish the same exact goal, perhaps more efficiently, perhaps just faster, or or what have you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you guys coming on here. I think this is a great tool to help understand, identify our personal tendencies and behaviors, and then giving us a model which we can use to analyze feedback, like you were just talking about, Bill. We can take the feedback and we can lead ourselves well, knowing ourselves better, and then knowing our teams. And that's, gosh, you guys know that's what I'm passionate about with my company. But it affects all of us, right? So knowing this, I hope that you, the listener, have taken this and you can listen to these terms of your following this tool, knowing your tendencies and your patterns, the actions, the consequences, and the reality of them. And using that simple framework is super powerful, like you said about Charlie, to liberate ourselves, to get us in a much better state of mind and way of living. And so as we wrap it up, Charlie, last thoughts, just, as we've gone through this exercise and how you see you may be able to use this in the future.
Yeah. Just continue to be open and to, like you said, invite feedback from others, because oftentimes it's that third party perspective that sees it clearer than ourselves being in the day-to-day and in the humdrum of life. We often miss certain things, just like was it Christmas Carol or one of those classic
Christmas Scrooge, where he's like,
Scrooge, where they see Christmas past, Christmas present, Christmas future, and being able to see it from that third party perspective, we see it so much clearer, but we can't. So being open and inviting others to share their feedback on our tendencies, that's the first step to be able to develop that awareness, so that we can actually make a conscious choice on whether we want to keep that or to let that go if it's not serving us.
Right. Adjust your pattern. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Charlie, for being here. Bill, last thoughts as we wrap it up?
Last thoughts. I've been working on a book on leadership called The Emotionally Healthy Leader. And there's some related materials in it. He refers to the thing that causes the tendency. It works really well with this too. That the thing that he calls the thing that causes the tendency, your shadow. And what I'm envisioning is that these tendencies, these shadows, have roots somewhere in the past. And while they won't necessarily get rid of your tendencies, if you can find where these things come from, what your shadow is, where the roots go, then you can start to take control of those tendencies. Whether it's a family, something passed on generationally, or something in your DNA, or something in your childhood. Yes, everything comes back to your childhood, and it's all your mother's fault.
I think that's a great
I'm kidding. I love my mother. She produces my podcast.
There you go. No, I think that's a great vision, though, because we cannot get rid of our shadow. Our shadow are always with us, right? It's always going to be there. However, like you said, Bill, that was a great observation about how we adjust the tendencies. And here's a little bit of homework I'll leave for all of us that are listening to this is you may know your tendencies, but it's actually pretty good to write them down as they come up, because you might forget them again. So take time when a tendency is, when either you recognize it in yourself or somebody else comments on a pattern of behavior and tendency, write it down so you can get clear and you can recognize when it comes again, and just start building. Like you said, Charlie, we'll go through our whole life and not know all of them. So you could just start to get clearer on those. Knowing yourself and leading yourself well. Well, thank you, Charlie and Bill, for coming back on. So glad to have you guys here.
My pleasure.
Thank you guys for listening into the Business Roundtable podcast. We appreciate you guys following along. Leave a comment. Please leave a review. It's all helping get the message out there. And this is absolutely free. This is something that we give back to you because we want to provide value and resources. Reach out to myself, Bill, Charlie here, any of those that you hear on this podcast. We would love to talk with you, connect with you directly. Find us on our company pages. Reach out here in a chat. We would love to hear from you. Thank you guys for being here. Have a great night.
Anytime. Thank you, David.
You too.
Great talking.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.